We're here to talk about the 4th of July today. I hope you had a great one. The state did not have very many 4th of July celebrations the year that it was started in 1783, but we hope that Burke County and Morgantown got around to celebrating in 1784. It isn't recorded, but here's the way we might have imagined it in the Freedom Tavern series. The Freedom Tavern was owned by John Cooper, and it was run by him and his family, and you'll meet several of those characters in this piece tonight, particularly Mary Jane, one of the sisters who was old enough to help her father with the businesses around the square. The 4 streets of Morgantown have been laid off in 1784, and you would recognize the locations and the names of those streets today. Meeting, Union, Green, Sterling, they're still there, but they were quite different in 1784. They are around the courthouse now, but then the courthouse lot was empty. And the courthouse itself was a log building that's kind of across the corner from where the courthouse is now. It may have looked a little bit like the town that you see here. That might have been Morgantown, except you would be able to see the streets. So today the people have gathered around the square to celebrate the 4th of July. Those people who have started businesses around the square, including the Cooper family, would be there to sell their wares as well as to celebrate. And here's what might have happened at that celebration, and this is in the words of Mary Jane Cooper. Independence Day fell on a Sunday in 1784, and the day was as warm and fair as there ever was one in early July. Alexander Irwin and Colonel McDowell ordered benches and a stage to be set up in the square, and at the corners of that lot, 4 large flags flapped in the summer breeze. Each banner, with its 13 stripes of red and white, displayed a field of stars. The women who were asked to sew the flags didn't really know how to make that star field. Some made stars with 5 points, and others had 6 or 8. Some put the stars in circles and others in rows. But while the stars differed, each flag displayed 13 of them on a background that came as close to the blue of night as possible. The stage was set up for our scheduled speakers, but to keep peace with the clergy, the local ministers were invited to lead prayers from the stage instead of in their normal places of worship. The Reverend James Templeton was given priority, as he was the only leader of a congregation with a solid church building, but Justin Evers represented his Baptist Brush Arbor flock with a prayer and a reading of Scripture. The Presbyterians of Quaker Meadows Church had become accustomed to indoor worship, and it was no surprise that the younger among us wiggled in their seats, distracted by the hubbub going on around the square. 'Twas all our Becky could do to hang on to my nephew Joshua, who, now able to take a step or two, was straining at his leaders to toddle off this way and that. With the flags waving and the smell of treats cooking behind the stalls, even those of us who were no longer children faced temptations in every direction. "There's Charlie Holberry," Joe shouted. He pointed to a shade tree along Meeting Street, where Charlie was waving to us. I was surprised to see his kinsman, Silas Oldham, was with him, as Silas had once fought with the Tories. Joe ran over to say hello, and once he returned to the bench, I asked him about Silas. "You know good and well that Silas is sorry about all that Tory business," Joe explained. "Even with that bum leg of his, and he stood 3 days in the pillory for his crimes before the court set him free, and he had to make up for any damage he did too. Beyond that, he still had to swear to Alexander Irwin that he was a loyal patriot for now and forever before they'd let him come here. I reckon he had a harder time getting to this day than most of us did." Tongues stopped wagging and children stopped fidgeting once music caught our attention and brought us together again. Dr. Dobson and Waitstill Avery came to the center of the stage, accompanied by a drum and fife corps. There they welcomed us to sing with them as they began a rousing version of the Liberty Song. Not everyone knew it. I did not. But Justin Evers was practiced at leading singing at his services. He spoke the words loudly in time for the group to sing along on the next line. Many knew the tune, as it was first used to the words of an old drinking song. Everyone sang the verse as well as they could follow the words, but many sang loudest at the familiar line in the chorus that worked as well for sailors on shore leave as it did for patriots. Our men stand ever ready. Steady, friends, steady. Some of the men stood up for those bold words, pumping their fists in the air and looking around to lock eyes and encourage the other men showing the same enthusiasm. The singing quietened when Colonel Charles McDowell led applause to signal the end of the song and stepped to center stage for a welcoming speech. "Huzzah for the Colonel and his brother Joe as well!" and similar shouts echoed from those gathered. Welcome, friends. I thank you, and so do all our brave men. Today we honor the signing of the Declaration of our independence from England and the start of our new nation. As you can see from the half-made buildings around us, we still have much to do. But 'tis fitting to pause in our labors to remember those who sacrificed for us through the war. Huzzah! 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 Colonel Charles waved his hat for the crowd before continuing. "We lost good men to the fight," he said. "Others came back from it maimed or ill, and we honor them for that sacrifice. But as it is in all wars, even those who did not hold a rifle or sword fought and suffered too. Wives lost strong husbands, children lost fathers, and we all lost friends and people who planted and crafted and traded for us." One woman stood on her bench to shout, "You tell the truth there, Colonel." The colonel bowed in her direction, then turned back to the crowd. "To honor the soldiers and all of us who survived to see this day, our fighting men parade around the square." A lame soldier waved his crutch. "We're ready for it, Colonel," he shouted. "Then listen for the sound of guns," Colonel McDowell commanded. "The parade will start with a 21-gun salute for our fallen men." Father pointed for Joshua to see the 21 men standing at attention at the far end of the lot. When a signal was given, the first row of 7 men fired. Becky clapped her hands over Joshua's ears, but the little fella tugged them away. 7 soldiers stepped back, and 7 more stepped forward to fire their guns when ordered. Finally, the last 7 completed 21 guns fired, and Joshua sat still for the first time of the day, fascinated as the parade began. As promised, each troop was led by his captain, dressed in the best parts of a uniform he owned. Following him came the ensign carrying a flag. As the captain entered the square from the eastern side of the stage, Colonel McDowell called out his name and they exchanged salutes. The crowd cheered for the troops representing their own homes, but they continued to cheer for each and every group of marching men to follow. Behind each troop walked the grieving women, each carrying a white blossom in memory of her son, sweetheart, or husband who was lost in the fight. "There's Grace McDowell and her daughter Polly," Mother pointed out. "She's walking in remembrance of her first husband, Captain John Bowman." Her new husband, Colonel McDowell, doffed his hat in respect as she passed by. "Look there," Becky said. "Dr. Dobson's wife lost her son John in the same battle." Dr. Dobson stepped up beside the colonel to salute his son's memory. Those ladies were escorted by 2 soldiers from Lincoln County who fought alongside Captains Bowman and Dobson at Ramseur's Mill, and they each wore a hat with a piece of white paper pinned to it, the only way the patriots could recognize who fought on their side in the battle. We wept and cheered for the widows as loudly as we did for the men who fought. The soldiers paraded down Meeting Street, up Green, and then another turn up Union, and then down Sterling behind the stage. There beside the watering trough, the men dismounted to wait for their fellow soldiers to finish the tour. Our Jack and other men too young to have fought in the war waited by the water trough to congratulate their muster companies as they dismounted. The sight of that congregation of fighting men laughing and hugging each other in a time of peace brought a tear to my eyes. Quite a few wet handkerchiefs waved from the bench rows. Once the parade was finished, Colonel McDowell announced, "When the men have eaten a bite, the captains will be setting up competitions for the military arts. Please visit their displays of prowess and enjoy the vendors and entertainers all around the square. Enjoy this day of freedom, friends, and celebrate your own accomplishments, for 'tis all of us, all of you, who will finish the job we started. 'Tis we together who will decide the fate and reputation of this great land. Cherish your families, and particularly our fighting men." With a nod and a gallant wave of his hat to the cheers, Colonel McDowell left the stage, along with his wife Grace, to join the rest of his family. We were free to mingle and enjoy the day with our neighbors. Most families brought their dinner. Some spread it out on the benches where they sat, and others sought shade among the lots lining the square. If a table was to be found, it was put to good use. Otherwise, folks shared their meals on quilts and cloths spread on the ground. So that's what the celebration may have been like, but there was a little bit of trouble to follow, and we'll read about that or hear about that in the next part of this video, 4th of July in 1784, and here comes trouble with the celebration. Thank you for listening.